Welcome to a little extra episode, a little bonus episode. It's another somewhat weekly release, except maybe it isn't. I don't know when this is coming out, but welcome one and
You'll
all.
hear it, that's for sure.
You'll definitely hear it at some point. Probably it's a Saturday evening and you're listening to this, in which case we've kept to our promise and it's a
Hmm.
weekly release.
Maybe you're tucked up tight with a hot cocoa
It's about that
in
time
front
of
of an
year.
open hearth.
Do many people still have open hearts going on?
I'd like to think that our listeners appreciate an open hearth.
Yeah, for sure. There's quite a lot in the game that we're talking about. I feel like every oldie building you go
It's
into,
full
and
of open hearths,
it
actually.
is, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, there's quite a lot of
And
them.
indoor gargoyles.
As promised, we are, I'd say, finishing the Arkham Origins discussion, but probably we're
Hmm.
gonna just talk about it all more in depth, really. So
Yeah.
I
This,
suppose we're not even finishing it. We're just gonna be talking about Batman Arkham Origins today.
hmm
Hmm.
and let me tell you, I actually, by the end, I had a really good time
Yeah, so
playing this game.
when we talked about it in last week's episode, we weren't that far in. We had got to full spoilers, by the way. This game has been out for 11 years. Um, we had got to sort of about a quarter of the way through the story, where you first and for the last time encounter the Penguin. And at
Hmm.
that point, I think it's fair to say you were not fully sold on it.
No, I mean, because we touched on as well. So the fact that of the Arkham games, this one was generally the worst received.
Yeah,
And there are points I feel like, and I do feel like it gets stronger as the game goes on, but
absolutely.
particularly by that point, feeling like, okay, I can understand why. I see where these criticisms come from. It doesn't feel polished. It doesn't feel like particular. It felt quite sort of like quickly written. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but
There's reasons why
the
for all of this. It's not just a poor game. We'll get into that in a minute. But
yeah,
yeah,
no, I'm sure. I mean, there always are those sort of like, oh God, well, it's just like the poor developers were being like whipped to to pump out this
often the
game
way
as quickly as they
nowadays.
possibly could. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
Actually, I'm just gonna add something. We probably should have added this at the start of the episode. When we spoke about this last week, we said there would be gameplay attached to this. There won't be for Origins, because of streaming limitations, but there will be for the games going forward because we will be playing them on physical media. So I mean, look, as we always do with the films, let's start by doing a sort of brief summary. Alfie, from what you can remember, main story, no side missions included because we didn't play them. What is the
No.
story of Batman Arkham Origins in not a nutshell? You got a bit of time to run with, but in brief.
So one shady Christmas Eve, one cold, dark, and miserable Christmas Eve in the absolute just hellhole that is Gotham.
Evil City.
Batman has had absolutely the worst place on earth. Batman has had a 50 million, is it 50 million?
Yes, yeah.
A $50 million bounty put on his head by who he believes to be initially Black Mask, right?
Yeah.
And so then a bunch of souped up freaks of assassins. There are six main ones
Yeah, there's six main ones, yeah.
are all out on this Christmas Eve to claim this bounty, and Batman's got to deal with them before they wreak any more havoc in the already, I think, too far gone, should probably just nuke it city of Gotham. Then, over the course of the game, you realize that Black Mask is actually dead. So it wasn't him
Well,
really.
not immediately, he's not. He is alive. He's alive for a bit. You find him, don't you? if I remember
Yeah, oh
rightly.
yeah,
You
yeah,
find him, but he's
yeah.
yeah, he's for the large part of the story dead. But you do find him, strung up in the steel
Oh,
mill.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Um, and it turns out that the Joker, who at this point in the canonically Batman hasn't met or encountered yet, has been posing as Black Mask. Um, and then so you get the Arkham Origins of Joker and Batman's relationship. Um, and I feel like I understand why it's obviously a big selling point. You get the Joker and everyone loves the Joker and everyone loves Batman and the Joker and their differences slash similarities, maybe, as the Joker would have you believe. I just don't know. I don't know why he had to be the villain. Bane is that's like I feel like that actually that's the main story shortcoming of the whole thing is that the Joker shouldn't just like give us someone else. Bane is such a good villain in
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
in the story. He works so well and so easily could be the big bad, the big boss that you've got to deal with.
and in
He's
many
also
ways
got
was.
like Bane turns it. Yeah, it turns out the Bane works out who Batman is. You've got the threat of that, like that in itself. Getting to and defeating Bane before he reveals who Batman is should have been the main plot line and not have but maybe Bane's working for the Joker because it's like we everyone knows who he is. And I mean to be fair, I don't know about the other Arkham games, but presumably this is the only one that Bane plays a big role in
He plays
pretty
his
much at the
largest
end.
role. Yeah, so he does appear. I mean, we'll find out because again, just not to plug future episodes, we will be playing through all of these. Um, he does appear again,
Yeah,
but not in such a significant way. In this one, like you said, he plays a very large role in the story. Whereas in
yeah,
others, he's kind of just a bit of a side mission.
yeah. He's just like a big he's just like a big henchman,
Yeah,
maybe.
he's at his
Yeah.
most interesting in this, and I feel I've got no sort of no information to back this up, but I almost feel as if Black Mask and Bane were, or even just Bane, were the villains for this game. And then again, we said about something
Mhm.
recently, but I can't remember what. I feel like it's a case of the studio have come in and gone, or I say the studio, that Warner Brothers have come in and gone, hang on a minute, where's the Joker? And they've
You've got to
gone,
put the Joker in
right,
this.
okay, yeah,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
we
yeah.
should, probably should. Because as good as the Joker is in it, the sort of the sections where you play as him and the story, especially towards the end with him, is good. It does feel a little bit shoehorned in.
Yeah, I felt that a lot. Um, Even just like stuff about I mean so when you're doing the first in-depth crime scene investigation where you go to
Is that the
Black
murder
Mask's
of Black
house.
Mask, or the
Yeah.
supposed murder of Black Mask? Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And the police think it's by the Penguin.
Yes. Yeah.
But it weren't the Penguin. And you find out that so like Batman finds Black Mask's girlfriend's phone and sees that she was sending texts about this shady character called the Joker, right? Um, and I feel like that because in that moment, right? So Batman doesn't know who we should have had it where Batman meets the Joker at the same time as the audience does, right? Because the moment Batman doesn't know who the Joker is, but we do know who the Joker is, and Batman's hearing about the Joker, it just all suddenly just feels a bit like, oh God, for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
Because it's like there's no there like any kind of like mystery is
It's the
then
same as
gone.
something I pointed out, and this comes from the fact that I've played it before, so I knew where it was going. But
Hmm.
um, when you're doing that mission, and those sort of familiar with the detective missions in the Batman games will know what I'm talking about. But you have to scan through the crime scene and kind of watch it with like wireframe people. And the movements of the
Hmm.
murderer are just like blatantly the Joker. When you've played them before, you see it and go, "Oh, okay, well, I know who that is." And I think that obviously being a prequel, people generally have played the other ones before. It does take you out of it a little bit when you realize, okay, Black Mask is not going to be around for much longer. Like you said, I feel that it would have been better if she had text whoever it was she was texting, without the Joker in it as the name. They could have even put like I don't know. He could have added some sort of code name at least. You know what I mean? I think it
Yeah.
was just way
And
too
it's like
blatant.
it's almost like it's like the game at that point is going it's almost like it's like it like feels that at that point, because when we were playing it at that point, you are like feeling a little bit like, oh, this feels a bit rough. This feels a bit like, and it's like the game going, oh, but hold up, wait, just wait a little bit because the Joker's coming. You know the Joker, he's coming. So just play through this bit that's a bit janky and a bit shit, and the Joker's coming. And it like almost feels like that, like a kind of like, no, keep going, keep going, keep going. We've got something really cool in store for you. But it would have been so much more satisfying, even because the Joker could have even been in it. But it would be so much more satisfying if we didn't know that the Joker was coming for like two-thirds of the game.
Yeah, yeah. He comes in about halfway through, doesn't he? It's
Yeah.
sort of about the 50% mark. Um, yeah, I think that that's a problem that the Arkham series, as we'll find out, has throughout. The first
Hmm.
two being Asylum and City, kind of the Joker being in them makes absolute sense. It's they were the first two games to come out. Of course, the Joker's gonna be them.
Yeah.
Arkham Knights, so the two bookend games, I suppose, has the same issue in that the Joker shouldn't have been in that game, and they just could not fathom that as an option. It's almost like as
Yeah.
soon as they realized he wasn't going to be in it, they had to find any way they could to put him in it. And that's not to say
Yeah.
again, it's not to say it's not a great character. We all sort of know and love Batman and the Joker, but and I
Mm.
said it about the Batman series last week. It's like they can't do anything else. It's like everything has to build to the Joker, and I get it. It makes sense. He's the most iconic villain of all time, but it almost makes everyone else feel like they don't really matter because you know where it's going and you know who's gonna
Yeah.
be behind it all. And the Joker stuff is great. There's a section towards the end of the game where you play as the Joker, and that's good fun. The
Hmm.
the sort of seeing him earlier in his career and that little deep dive into who he is, it was really nice.
Hmm.
But again, they don't. It's not really needed. I feel like he's a character that doesn't need an origin. It's never really been confirmed what his origin is, other than that he fell into a
Yeah.
vat of acid. So let's just leave it at
I think
that.
yeah, and it's sort of I don't know, just you have like towards the end of the game, you have that really long like multi-stage fight with Bane that's really good,
Yeah.
but you know the whole time I've got to catch up with the Joker. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think Bane was a much more compelling villain because I think especially if you don't know the character, I think if you just said Bane to someone that sort of half knew about him, you would think he's just this big Hulk like wrestler guy. But for
yeah,
them
yeah,
to
yeah,
give him the space to show that he is actually also just sort of a Bruce Wayne level genius until his brain gets ruined by
yeah.
what's it called in this? Like TN1? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
that was brilliant.
there was a moment actually that I did want to mention where because it's called Venom, isn't it? The drug that he
Yes,
used
yeah.
is he refers to it as TN1 and Venom. And there's a point where Batman refers to it as a street drug. And so are they just like in the Batman universe, are they just like hobos
Doing Venom.
doing that, just like juiced up, like massive killing machines, just like I mean to be fair, like probably,
Well, the
right? They
number of prisoners
probably
you
are.
find that have the venom tubes in their back, and then you're just fighting like these
Yeah.
mini Banes. There's loads of them, so I guess so. Yeah, I mean, if he's testing it on, it's probably just a throwaway line. There's a couple of prisoners talking about how they're up next for for his testing. So I suppose if he's testing it on just random street level criminals. Maybe it is, but yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I obviously that's the story out the way. Sorry for anyone that we spoiled it for. Of course, it's only a
We're
recent
not sorry
release.
at all.
No.
We're not even sorry
I
for a second.
and we never will be. I think that this game massively benefits from working in tight spaces. I think the open world
Hmm.
is a product of its time, and that was where we got
Yeah.
up to when we last spoke about it. All of it had been in Gotham in the open world, and it's
Yeah.
very lackluster and grey, and the frame rate really struggles, and so do a lot of the textures as a result, and it looks really low res. As you get
Yeah.
further into the story, the gliding isn't brilliant, but it's serviceable. It's not that's the main issue. I think that it benefits a lot from having focus. And when you get into these tighter spaces, such as I think the first example of it is you infiltrate the GCPD, and then you go into the
Yeah.
sewers underneath it, and it really starts to shine. First of all, because it's not so sort of taxing on I mean, what, two generations old consoles now?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the graphics really start to shine there. It looks really clean and nice. The combat is at its best there as well because you're not
Hmm.
having to deal with like massive frame rate drops from where there's a million other goons around the city.
Hmm.
That and the level design is really good. It lends itself really well to the sort of stealthier bits that it really pushes you to take part in. And
Hmm.
it almost feels like a different game. I wish that it had gone that way because Arkham Asylum is a lot more like that. It's very sort of linear with a couple of little hubs here and there. And I think that
Yeah.
Origins also benefits hugely from tightening its focus right up. And the same as in the story, when you're focusing on one bit at a time, when you're focusing on taking down one villain, it's at its best. As soon as you then broaden it out and the Joker's got bombs around the city, oh no, then it falls apart a little bit.
Yeah. 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 I do. I think I think. Oh, I mean, yeah. I suppose the whole sort of faux open world aspect of like the first half of the game feels like an afterthought
Mm.
as well. It feels like something to have gone like so. I again like I haven't played them, so I don't know. But if the two games that came out before, the two Arkham games that came out before, are more on rails feeling, it feels like they've seen, after those games came out, they've seen sort of more open world games coming out around that kind of time as well. Like what, like 2011?
2013 this one came
This
out,
came out, did
but
it?
around the time of it being
2013.
made, yeah, it would have been around sort of
Yeah.
2010, 11.
Um, yeah, and so that was sort of there were like Just Cause 2 come out around that kind of time.
Yeah, the Just Cause games were coming out around that time. I mean, you just had GTA 4 come out, so again, New York, well, it wasn't New York, it's
Yeah,
Liberty
yeah,
City,
yeah, yeah.
but that's what they're competing with.
Yeah, like and it feels like they've kind of gone, "Oh, right, okay, that's what's big right now. We've got to find a way to fit some of this into our game."
I imagine there
As
was a lot
opposed
of
to
pressure from Warner Brothers to compete with these things. And that, again, it's the same as the
yeah.
Joker. I think the downfall of this game is there is a lot of pressure from Brothers who have previously seen Asylum and City do really well. And so
Hmm.
now they have all these beats to hit, and I don't think they were planning to originally.
Yeah. Um and it's a shame when you see because it's quite obvious the bits, the elements you feel what's had loads of time put into it and loads of thought put into it. Like most of the boss fights, I've got to say some of them I found slightly forgettable. Like the Firefly boss fight, I thought was a bit
Yeah,
bad.
to be honest, in my head, that was a side mission when I like in memory, and it feels like
Yeah,
that. It feels like they should have left it, with some of the others, like Shiva is another one, a dead shot where you find them as side missions. I think Firefly probably was meant to be a bit of a side mission, to be honest with you.
yeah. And Copperhead was better, but I still didn't. That didn't feel because I mean when you fight Deathstroke and the three times you fight Bane,
Yeah,
is it three?
yeah.
Um, they they like the Bane ones get a bit repetitive, but then each time he gets stronger, so you feel like there's like meaningful progression and it feels satisfying every time. And also because you only defeat him right at the end, so like you both sort of just about get away, you just like scrape out of it. And then you go back and you fight him again, and it's the same kind of thing, but it's a bit different. And like, yeah, I mean, the Deathstroke fight is so good, and that's the first one, like the first proper boss fight that it throws you into. So you feel like, oh my God, okay, this is going to be good. And then Copperhead, and then Firefly, and it's just like it's a bit. They both just, by comparison, feel disappointing because you fight Bane between Copperhead and Firefly, and then after Firefly as well.
But then I think that it's kind of
And so it
good.
just makes those two feel really weak.
I think it's good in a way in the sense that they are absolutely at best B-list Batman villains, maybe C-list. And so to
Yeah,
have
that's true.
them, Deathstroke and Bane, I mean, Deathstroke's not necessarily a Batman villain, but Deathstroke and Bane are like A-list villains, so they would have to be harder. So I think it's good that in a way Batman does easily dispatch them, or else we'd start to think, yeah, he's probably a bit rubbish at this if every villain he's fought, he's like really struggled against. So in a way, it kind of works
Yeah, no, that's true.
story-wise.
But then I think maybe make those boss fights feel more fun.
Yeah,
And like
yeah,
because the one against Firefly isn't like, oh, this is a bit tedious, but it's really rewarding because I'm so much more capable of dealing with this guy than he thinks I should be. So it's like you have that sort of satisfying thing of being like, I'm just gonna kick the shit out of this dude because I totally can. It's still like a slog. It's still like, oh God, what again? More? I have to throw my glue grenades at this guy for like a 20th time and just like
yeah.
it's so frustrating and so like it really drags. And the Copperhead fight as well, I think was cool in theory, but then it's just like you're just fighting a big group of goons again,
Yeah,
but it's her.
I think that the best the best boss fights are in this game, but so are some of the weakest ones. Deathstroke is probably the best boss fight in the series and one of the best boss fights in gaming, full stop. If anyone has any better ones in mind, please let us know. But I think it's one of the best in gaming in general. Same as the Bane ones. That final Bane fight, I kept telling you I was sure it was coming up because I played this game when I was like 11. I remember it vividly. I was terrified, and I sort of I can see why now. It's still a pretty tense boss
Yeah,
fight. It's not particularly hard. Like, well, playing it now, it was probably the easiest of them because all you really have to do is just sneak up on
yeah,
him, and he's really dumb. But when he's thudding
yeah,
around and your detective vision cuts out and he's tearing the vents out of the walls and like stomping them through the floor, you start to like you start to feel like you would in that situation of like shit, I have like no
yeah,
options left, nowhere to turn. And you know that if he gets you, he's going to kill you. Simple.
yeah.
The boss fights in it are brilliant. There's just also some filler ones. And there's quite a few
Yeah.
in the side missions, which again we didn't play. I have played them before, but they're nothing to write home about. There's just some cool little
Mhm.
encounters. Like Deadshot is like kind of cool,
Hmm.
but yeah, I don't necessarily mind there being some boring ones in there because there are in most games. There's only so much you can really do, especially with console limitations at the time. And before people start to think, oh, what about PC? PCs at the time were also like, not what they are today. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's got to be limitations. It's not quite as disappointing as like some of them are later in the series where they absolutely could have done more. Deathstroke
Yeah.
returns later on. I won't really spoil it, but the boss fight is considerably more underwhelming than the worst ones in these. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have some downtime, I suppose, especially because if you went from Bane fight straight to another Bane fight, it would probably be like too intense. So actually, the Firefly mission is quite good
Yeah.
because it gives you a little break to sort of get some upgrade points, refine your skills, and then you go into the final push in Blackgate.
Yeah. No, that I mean that's true. And I suppose that makes sense from a like game design point of view. I guess I just wish it had been a different villain who was again slightly more interesting slash
Yeah,
maybe challenging, or
yeah.
maybe maybe like easier in as much as not being so like feeling like such a drag.
It didn't need to be so
Um,
repetitive, but I think it's quite good.
but
It's introduced you to new
no,
villains that you didn't know before. Like you wouldn't have known who Firefly was, and it's
yeah,
quite cool in that aspect.
no, that's true.
It
Yeah,
doesn't all have to be Joker and the Penguin. So I'm quite
no.
happy with his inclusion. I thought it was quite cool.
I suppose other things I wanted to touch on, sort of about characters and such. Um, is um Batman's relationship with Alfred
I knew you were going to say that.
in
Yeah,
this, and it's he's such an asshole to that poor old man until he dies, and you have to press square to shock Alfred to resuscitate his heart
with the
with
shock gloves.
electrocutioner's shock gloves. It's like after the first time you fight Bane and the Joker's there, like Alfred's like, you should come on home, Bruce, because you're knackered and you need to rest up a little bit. And he's like made him Christmas dinner, and and like Bruce Wayne, Batman is essentially just like, fuck off, Alfred,
Yeah,
shut
he
up, you
hates him.
pansy. Like he's so rude to him, he's so mean. And yeah, and it's not until he almost dies and Batman presumably realizes like, oh shit, I'd be completely done for without this old bloke. Like that he starts to really, really openly care about how he's doing. But like up until that point, he's just he just sees him as just a facilitator. Like
But
he's
I
just there
think
so
that
that he can get the stuff that he wants to get done.
his arrogance is a big part of the story, though. In even to the bit that gets Alfred killed, which is where Alfred basically says he's gonna leave and call the police, and
Yeah,
Batman says no, you'll be safe at the Batcave because he's so sure of himself. And then, sure enough, Alfred gets killed until he's revived. I think that's a big part
yeah,
of the story to see how he becomes who he is. But yeah, he's just nasty, and I think that
yeah,
one fairly major criticism of the Arkham games I have is that they don't ever go into the Bruce Wayne side of things, and I would really like if they did. I think there's a lot to be explored there, just from that little snapshot of how he is with Alfred. I think there'd
yeah,
be a really good chunk that they could give to that. I mean, Spider-Man games did with Peter Parker. There's a lot of people criticize them because they're slow, but the
yeah,
story beats in those Peter Parker sections were brilliant. I'd quite like to see a bit
yeah,
more because at the minute, Bruce Wayne just seems like an asshole, like a totally
yeah,
irredeemable asshole.
yeah. Alfred calls him a young man with a trust fund and too much anger.
Yeah, and he's
Um,
right.
yeah, and he's like dead on, and Batman's just like, yeah, like may as well have just been like, fuck you, and like leaves. And it's just like like he's sitting there like he's like sending him like codes to get through. Like he could not do what he fundamentally could
Well,
not
he's
be doing
making
what
all of
he
his
was doing if
tech. Like
Alfred wasn't there.
he puts together
Yeah,
the glue grenade for him, and he makes the going forward through the game series. There's not so much that dynamic. I just think it's really funny that they decided that they were going to do that in this game. They're just like, yeah, and for most of the like 8 hour runtime of the story, he's just going to be nasty. I think that even Origins, as weak as it is compared to the others in a way, it is like they couldn't have got it more perfect in many ways as well for what it has to do.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I really actually by the end of by the end of Origins, I really, really, really enjoyed it, and it felt like a very like satisfying piece of like Batman media, you know?
Yeah,
Like you get your like super set. I can't remember if I said this last time. Um, but you start to think that maybe the Joker's got a point. Maybe Batman's too fucking serious, and I think Alfred says it to him as well, you know? But you get that. You get all your like super serious brooding Batman, bullshit that he's always on. The fact that everything's called the Bat something. Always always hilarious,
I
always
love that.
absurd. Yeah, he just takes himself so seriously. It's so good. He just like he can't see the ludicrousness of that. He's got his bat, whatever.
The
Um,
Batclaw, the
you
Batarang,
got an
the
iconic array of villains and also some kind of comically stupid and useless ones. It's fun. It's good. It's got all the Batman stuff. It's got all the stuff he does.
It is. It's so for a prequel that was made by an offshoot of the original studio that made it. Like it has no right to be as enjoyable as it is, and I think it deserves a lot of credit. It
Mm.
is unpolished and it is a little bit derivative story wise. It's a little bit predictable, but it's about as perfect as it could be, given the various issues. Because so for some context, normally we do this sort of around the start, but we'll do it now. For some context, Rocksteady made Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, but by this point, when they were sort of asked by Warner Brothers that they want to do a prequel, they were busy making Arkham Knight. That was a game that was had a very long development cycle, so they instead Warner Brothers gave it out to an in-house studio to do Arkham Origins, the prequel, and it's yeah, it's very faithful to to the rest of the series. It's great, all things considered. There's a few inconsistencies. It's a little bit funny that his suit is like fully armored and teched up, and then by the next one chronologically, he's just basically back in spandex. But it's other than that, it doesn't. There's no glaring plot holes that you would expect from these things. There's no major issues other than a few bugs here and there. Like I had a bug where I jumped into one of the last fight set pieces and we were all stuck in our counter animations, so nobody could fight, and we were all just dancing around each other to like close the game. But yeah, that again, that's
Yeah, I
kind
actually
of to
didn't
be
encounter any
expected.
bugs
Yeah,
while I was
it's
playing.
fairly smooth.
There were
That's the only one I had.
there were funny things like the fact that there were certain parts of areas and levels where you were meant to fight a group of guys where there was obviously a boundary where that you can access really easily, but they hadn't expected you to go into or something like that. So there's a couple of fights where you're in like a big warehouse or something, and you walk like 3 feet away over like some kind of boundary where suddenly, even though there's nothing between, there's not even like a doorway or anything. It's just like a part of the room where the enemies just won't follow you, and they'll just kind of forget.
See, I
And
never
then
encountered
because
that.
you leave the fight, yeah, because and something like because you leave the fight, you get all your health back because normally you don't regenerate during the fights. So there's like a couple of weird little, obviously just sort of like bugs and glitches that I came across that were just more sort of like, but nothing that meant that I couldn't keep playing the game. Um, so I mean, I suppose I mean things like the camera I've struggled with quite a lot. I felt like that was something that
I
felt
did have a
really
few camera
unpolished.
bugs. Yeah.
But yeah, not even bugs, just like like the controls just felt sloppy and like sometimes quite often the camera was too felt like it was way too tight in on Batman and you didn't have enough peripheral vision to see what was going on.
I
Like,
think that that's a bit of a bug though, because what I noticed was that sometimes when you're moving the camera around and you walk next to a wall, it like pushes the camera in towards him and it gets stuck there. Only
oh,
briefly,
okay.
like I found that when I then moved on to the next bit, if I went into a new room or jumped into a vent or whatever, it would fix
Hmm.
itself. But I found that quite often it was like cutting off quite a lot of what I could see because it was stuck looking over his shoulder or something.
Some of the movement controls I just found a bit janky as well. I feel like Batman at times he sort of switches between being really agile and then as soon as you need him to be suddenly really lumbering and can't go in the direction you're trying to get him to go in.
Yeah,
And that's also something to do with the way the camera is set up as well.
yeah, that's a consistent issue through the
Um,
series until probably like
yeah,
Arkham Knight is a lot more polished. But yeah, that is an issue. But that's not bad
yeah,
going, to be honest. If this is the only issues we've got from what is objectively the worst game of the series, that's like not bad at all.
no,
There's one thing I wanted to say, and it's it's in the running for like one of the worst post-credit scenes of all time, just because it goes absolutely nowhere. Is at the very everyone's locked up in prison. It's Christmas Eve. Santa's probably on his way to Gotham. Not that there's anyone good to give presents to, and
No, nobody deserves it there except
and
Alfred, I think.
except Alfred, he deserves an extra helping of roast dinner and presents. And all was quiet, not a sound around because everyone's in prison. Uh, so we go to Blackgate, where Deathstroke is locked up, and he's not really interested in bothering anybody because Batman he even says to Batman that he doesn't care about killing him unless there's a $50 million bounty on him. And
Yeah,
Amanda Waller, who famously like puts together the Suicide Squad, comes to him with a folder that she throws down on the floor in front of him, and it's basically like here's something you might be interested in, alluding to the Suicide Squad. And nothing ever happens with that. There was a Suicide Squad game made by Rocksteady. Deathstroke's not in it. And like it's like what? Like why do that unless you're going to make the game? And there was a planned Suicide Squad game that got cancelled and retooled into the new one. But as being that it's not even Rocksteady that made Arkham Origins, why would you put that at the end of your game? It's almost like throwing them a bit of an alley-oop that they just like couldn't be bothered to jump up for. It's just like, yeah, here you
yeah,
go, we've set this up for you, and they're like, we weren't gonna do that. Like, why would you do that?
yeah. It felt really weirdly tacked on and also confusing, considering it's already a prequel to other games, right?
Hmm.
To set something else up that isn't the games that follow,
That's what I mean.
like
Why do
chronologically,
it as a little
right?
offshoot prequel? Why
Yeah,
bother? Because the Suicide Squad is not in any of the others. And everyone is still in prison come the next one, pretty much. That's the whole point of
yeah,
Arkham Asylum, is it's all in the prison. So I just couldn't understand, yeah, what
yeah,
that was about. It's kind of neither here nor there. It's one of those things where being a video
yeah. It was
game, I
kind
don't
of
think people cling on to it as much as they would with a movie, but still pointless and
yeah.
stupid.
It's the kind of thing that it's the kind of thing that had I played it at the time, I'd be like, "Whoa, no way,
Yeah.
that's so exciting!" But with the hindsight now of like, it's just a bit like, oh,
Yeah, it was a
okay,
cool scene. I'm not saying it's a
yeah,
bad scene. It's only a bad scene because looking back on it, like you said, with hindsight, you just think, like, what was the point of that? If Rocksteady did it, if they made the game and they put that in there and it didn't happen, I would be happy to attribute that to like, oh, it was just one of those things that got cancelled. But it wasn't even them making this game. It's so
yeah,
bizarre.
yeah.
But
I,
neither here
I
nor
I
there.
suppose it's like a fun little. I guess they obviously acknowledge and recognize that Deathstroke was like the most kind of like exciting villain in that, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
And so they're like, oh, give him a little last kind of last moment for the player to like, because I really like the fact that when you're walking back through the prison trying to find the Joker, like, because he says something about how like the Joker didn't want to let him out because he was like
He doesn't want to
scared of
waste his
him or
time.
something.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Like as in
Yeah.
Deathstroke doesn't like wasting time, so he would just kill him.
Yeah. Um and like so he's just like in there just doing push-ups.
Yeah, and
Um
he's not fussed about getting out when Batman gets there either. He's just
no.
fine with it.
Yeah. And you just have like a little chat with him. Um, and yeah, I guess it's kind of cool to have like a final moment for him as like a really good villain.
Yeah,
Um,
he's one of the strongest parts of the game by far.
yeah. And it's almost again like if the two big bads were like Bane and Deathstroke,
Mm.
because the Deathstroke fight being so early on in the game, again, I guess as I said earlier, but like it sets you up for everything to be at that level. And then when it's not, it like that's when boss fights and like weird other sections feel like lackluster and annoying and
Yeah,
boring and like a drag. And so have those two be like the main threats
yeah,
because really, actually, they are like that. Like Deathstroke was the boss fight I died most playing. Like it was the hardest one.
yeah, for sure.
But
Yeah,
then when you get into the rhythm of it, the most satisfying. And actually, to be fair, so sorry, just to slightly change subjects as well, going back to like mechanics, the the fight mechanics I found pretty difficult to get into the swing of. But then the moment you do, and the moment you go into the first time you go into a big room of goons and you time all of your counters perfectly and take them all out without getting hit once is the most satisfying thing
yeah, the
I've
combat is
experienced in
incredibly
games.
satisfying. Yeah,
Um, and until then, like until you sort of get a hold on the right combos, the right timing for like and the different styles of attacks from the different kinds of enemies, it can feel a little bit like it's a bit punishing and it's a bit just like you're kind of getting like slapped around left, right, and center and then like charged into by a really massive guy and then like picked up and like shot as well from afar. There's just guys just like shooting at.
even when you get good at it, there's still moments I found where I'd walk into a room and for the first like 10, 15 seconds, I'm just getting punched in the back of the head.
Yeah,
Like it's very rewarding, but it is tricky. I don't know how I
yeah.
played it when I was so young. It's not an easy game. Bits of it that I'm playing, and I'm better at video games than I was then. But there's bits of it, and I'm just thinking, I don't know how I worked this out. Like the bits where you're having to look at. There was a bit. Sorry to totally change the flow of where you were going, but there's a bit at the end, towards the end, where you have to use your glue grenade and you have to float down this like sewer and pull yourself along, and then there's like floodgates that you have to open and raise the water up.
Oh
It took me
God.
forever to work that out, and I don't
Yeah.
know how I did it so young because like I'm double the age I was when I played that game for the first time, and it took me about 15 minutes of just like sitting there going, "What
I
the hell am I doing?"
I think maybe because it reminded me of I remember I remember playing the Lego Harry Potter games on the Wii and getting stuck in weird bits where the the level design and the limitations of the time and whatever, just like the the level was so dark and stuff like that that
Yeah,
you where it should didn't need to be, you couldn't see things. And so I'm just like running around for ages trying to work out what the hell I meant to do. I'm stuck. I can't climb up onto a thing. And I think that just like there is in games that I've played, more recent games that I've played that have come out more recently, that have been made more recently, there's certain like things that seem to come up in older games where it's just that like you can't tell what you're meant to do a lot of the
yeah.
time because it doesn't look like you just can't work it out. But like I found there were quite a few moments like leading up to the Firefly fight, right, where you're like grappling
Oh,
around the inside of the bits of
yeah,
the bridge and trying to get up to different bits, and it all looks identical. It's all a bit too dark, and you just don't know where you're meant to go. Like, and it
yeah.
doesn't really help you that much. And so I'm just like walking back and forth, leaving the mission area quite often and having to go back down and like no idea where I'm meant to be going, no indication of it. Like going in detective vision, thinking that's going to help me, it doesn't. Like just eventually trial and error, going down the right path, doing the right thing.
A big problem that I kept saying about because again, just for some context, we actually played this with each other pretty much, and a big thing I kept saying to you is I can't work out where I'm going ever because
Yeah,
everything looks the same, like everything, and I don't even think that's limitations in technology because the graphics come the like I said, the more pared down parts of the game, it looks really good. It's just that the level design in places is so poor that every hallway, every elevator, every like grappling point looks identical to the next. And so you're walking around in a loop and you think, oh, I've not seen this one before, except you have seen it like five different times. But like because they all
yeah.
look the same. But yeah, I think that it is of the time. I've got no criticisms of this game other than that it's aged. really. And it's the same for the story.
Yeah.
I think that again, at the time, I know that there's been great game stories throughout history, but for a big franchise, a pre-existing franchise in Batman, that there was rarely much effort put into these things, into sort of tie-in
Hmm.
stories. And the Arkham games did
Just
quite a
hoping
lot
that it
to
would be
change
carried
that.
by,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, look at Star Wars, for example. Star Wars has had so many games throughout history. We played a couple on the podcast, and they've got quite good recently, but there's so many just poor Star Wars games that are totally carried solely by the fact that you have a lightsaber.
Yeah.
Or sometimes
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah,
even
yeah, yeah.
that. Same as Harry Potter. We played the Quidditch World Cup game, and that was quite fun. But there's
Hmm.
been many Harry Potter games throughout the years that have just been kind of rubbish, and it's quite refreshing that actually the story in this one has quite a lot of thought, even if it is a little bit paint by numbers, it's still good and everyone's still quite well written.
Hmm.
And I think the final major thing that I want to touch on is that the voice acting is, as with all the series, brilliant, but it's the first one and only one so far that's not a Mark Hamill Joker and a Kevin Conroy Batman. But you don't notice
Hmm.
that. It doesn't feel like either I mean, you haven't played the other ones, but I don't think even you, it doesn't feel like they're doing just like an impersonation. They both yeah, it's Troy Baker as the Joker, and Troy Baker is in everything, and it's Roger Craig Smith as Batman, but neither of them feel like they're doing cheap impersonations. Both of them do bring a lot of life to the characters, which is quite nice because it, even when I played it the first time, I was aware that it wasn't the original two actors, and it's again refreshingly good for a recast role.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's obviously kind of, I think actually no, to be fair, I was about to say there's moments where the voice acting isn't, I didn't feel convinced by, but I actually think that's not about the voice acting. It's more about some of the writing.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a brilliant job done by all of the voice actors, I think.
So on this podcast, we have a
Hmm.
ranking system for
We
movies
have
and
an
TV shows.
infallible ranking system.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's a better or worse than a system. If you listen to the rest of it, which we would highly and unbiasedly recommend, you will know that we're up to
Hmm.
Megalopolis. So are the films or TV shows we watch better or worse than Megalopolis? We're gonna have to start it again for this. We've done video games before, but we've never really ranked them. So we're gonna start from the very start, the very first episode of the podcast, some 2 years ago. And you might remember, dear listeners, or maybe you will go back and hear, we played the Oregon Trail, the text-based adventure game. And so we're going to start from there. We're going to ignore the other games we've played because we didn't rank them. So, Alfie, I'm going to ask you, and it feels really unfair to ask this. It feels like it's so weighted against the Oregon Trail here. But did you find Batman Arkham Origins to be better or worse than the Oregon Trail?
I, if you can believe it, I thought that Batman Arkham Origins was better than the 1973 text adventure game, The Oregon Trail. I
Yeah.
thought this was a better game.
Well, I'm interested to see where this goes because the issue we have with doing this system for the films is that we get stuck in a rut after a while because it's hard to find worse films. So we introduced the not
Consistently, just worse and worse and worse
yeah.
movies.
So we always did better or worse than the worst film we'd seen. We've also introduced the second tier of is it better or worse than the best film we've seen. So I guess that positions Arkham Origins as the best game we've ever played, and the Oregon Trail really
Mm.
unfairly as the worst game we've ever played.
The worst.
I don't even think it's the worst game we've played on the podcast, but because it's the first, there we go.
What would you say was? What do you think?
This is an opportunity to
Racer
plug.
Revenge, maybe?
Yeah, I was gonna say this is an opportunity to plug a previous episode. I think Racer Revenge. So Batman Arkham Origins, until we play Arkham Asylum, the best
Best
game we've
game
ever
we've
played.
ever played.
And therefore the best game that exists because we've played all the video games in history. We will be back in under a week. We'll be back on Thursday to talk about Gladiator 2. A little bit late.
Better late than never. And that's it.
Yeah. You'll be able to find that episode if you subscribe to us on whatever platform you're listening to. Subscribe and rate it as always. Thank you for listening. Good night, folks. Happy
Thank you for listening.
Christmas. It's the day after Arkham Origins now, so happy
Merry
Christmas. Merry Christmas,
Christmas.
everyone.
Ho, 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 ho.